Welcome to Week 6, Education 406. Let's take a look at our syllabus for Week 6 so that we're able to identify our learning outcomes, our tasks and assessments. This week we have our regular discussion board and interactive notebook, but we have a supplemental task that's not within that notebook, so we want to make sure that we touch base on that so that we're able to make sure that we have all questions answered with that. So here in week 6, we have several outcomes, but it's the same outcome that meets multiple overall course outcomes. So you're going to be designing a learning segment, reading comprehension lessons for students in a grade level of your choice. And that same learning segment is going to be based on best instructional practices in reading. So that same weekly outcome meets several of your overall course learning outcomes. And then identifying best practices when integrating reading across content areas, specifically science and social studies, is what we'll be talking about as well. So we have our weekly discussion board, and then in your interactive notebook you have some anchor chart work and strategies that work, chapter 13, and then we're going to discuss a learning segment plan. So let's jump back and look in our weekly content at week 6 so that we can see our discussion board. And your discussion board this week has a couple of questions to also consider, and you don't have to answer all of them, but just a couple, 3 questions. So in chapter 13, the authors are talking about cultivating student thinking by encouraging attitudes and behaviors of curiosity, mindfulness, and inquiry. So the reflection questions from Harvard's Project Zero are, so questions that teachers need to be asking themselves as we're trying to build this environment where students are encouraged to be curious and mindful and dig deeper into the reading that they're doing. The questions from that Harvard Project Zero are students explaining things to one another? Are students offering creative ideas? Are students and teachers using language of thinking? And are students debating interpretations? So those are things that should be happening if we're truly cultivating student thinking. And so those 4 questions came from the research from Harvard. The authors also offered 4 supplemental questions. Are kids wondering and asking questions? Are they synthesizing as they read? Are they connecting the new to the known? And are they using text evidence to draw conclusions and infer themes? So there are 8 questions there between the 4 from Harvard and the 4 from the authors of the textbook. I want you to choose any 3, and I want you to speak to those. You can refer to a current placement, a previous placement, or your experience, but somehow I want you to speak to 3 of those 8. Remember that you are posting and then you're replying to 2 peer posts. So those will be the 8 options that you have to choose from. But again, you only have to identify 3 of them that you're going to respond to. So again, you have to navigate back to week 1 for your interactive notebook as we look specifically into those chapters that you're going to be building in. So when you access that, you'll get to week 6. And again, this chapter speaks to content literacy, so how we're reading across the content areas for science and social studies. In the first part of the chapter, the chapter overall is divided half for science, half for social studies. So there are 8 instructional techniques that are shared for literacy practices in science. I want you to create 1 anchor chart as a display for those 8 techniques and have some kind of brief definition and example in your own words. So on 1 anchor chart, you're going to have all 8. So think of them as like little pops, and you can have it divided in sections. You can have it randomly placed, but I just want to make sure that you understand you're not creating 8 anchor charts. You're creating 1 anchor chart with 8 elements on it. And then the same is true for your social studies content literacy instructional techniques. There's 9 here, so you're going to create 1 anchor chart and put those 9 instructional techniques for content literacy social studies on that 1 anchor chart. Make sure that you have what the strategy is, a simple brief definition, and then an example that you're putting on the anchor chart. Again, for those anchor charts, you can design it like hard copy on chart paper, or you're welcome to do it digitally and then insert it either way into your answer areas. So if we go back to our syllabus, we've talked about our discussion board and our interactive notebook. We've talked about your anchor charts that go along with Chapter 13. So now let's talk about this learning segment plan. When we go back into week 6, you're going to see the learning segment plan. That is the rubric for it, and then your Turnitin link. So your learning segment plan is worth 100 points, and it's your lesson planning in a sense, but you're doing it over 3 to 5 lessons. So you're going to be using a lesson plan format that you're familiar with. So if your school, or if you're more familiar with 6-point or Learning Focus or whatever, the format is less the issue. But you're going to plan 3 to 5 lesson learning segment anchored in one of the comprehension strategies that you've read about and strategies that work. So referring to the foundational ideas within chapters 1 through 5, you're going to choose some strategies through those middle chapters to design your learning segment. Be sure that you refer to the rubric and note the change in points on page 1 and 2. So on page 1, you'll see our points are up to 20 points for each of these, but then as we get to page 2, they drop to 10 points each. So please make sure that you're just aware of that. So you're going to have at least 3 lessons. So in learning, it's going to be pretty much the same setup for each lesson, but the first one and the third one will have a little bit of a difference. So in learning segment 1, your lesson 1, you're going to include the standard course of study, what your comprehension strategy is, your pre-assessment for the learning segment. So how are you going to pre-assess what they already know and don't know about that comprehension strategy? A formative assessment for that lesson. So every time we teach, we need to be able to know where our students are by the end of our lesson. So what is that formative assessment going to be? What materials you're going to need, and what teacher actions are going to be happening. What is the teacher going to do, and what are the students going to do? So that needs to happen for your first lesson plan. So whatever format you choose, Learning Focus, 6-point, whatever, you need to make sure that you have these elements within that plan somehow, somewhere, some way. For your second lesson, now these should be lessons that would be delivered back to back. So these should be things that like you would teach Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or they're sequential. So please make sure that that's the case. They should flow. In your second lesson, it's pretty much the same, although you're not going to have a pre-assessment because you did that in lesson 1. So again, you have your standard course of study, your comprehension strategy, a formative assessment for this lesson, materials, and teacher and student actions. And then learning segment number 3 now has your standard course of study again, comprehension strategy, but now you have a post-assessment. So don't think of your pre and post assessment as some like major unit assessment. This would be something a little less formal, but your post assessment should be same or aligned to your pre-assessment, because that's how you really measure growth, if you're giving the same assessment before and after. So you're having in your third lesson your standard course of study, comprehension strategy, post assessment, your formative assessment, which is, what are you doing throughout that lesson to make sure that they understand what you're trying to teach in that specific lesson. And then materials and teacher actions and student actions. Now, please note, so I'm requiring 3 lessons for this learning segment. If you would like to do a 4th and or 5th lesson, you are more than welcome to do so, but you have to have all required elements in order to get the extra credit points. So I will give you 10 points for each additional lesson that you create. Again, it needs to be in sequence with the rest of your learning segment. And basically what would happen is if you are doing 4 lessons, then you would have learning segment lesson 1 the same here. And then 2 and 3 would have these requirements, and 4 would have these requirements. If you're doing 5 lessons, then lesson 1 is the same. These would be lesson 2, 3, and 4, and then lesson 5 would have these requirements. But it is up to you. You do not have to do 5, you do not have to do 4, but you do have to have 3. Then just in general, making sure, because there's going to be a reflection piece to your learning segment plan, make sure that that is 2 pages typed and there's your requirements for formatting. Your reflection needs to be very well written, no distracting errors. You are integrating comprehension strategies in your conversation. You are sharing what the learning segment would look like in your classroom and discuss any possible challenges. So this is just the planning piece of things, but we need to know what it would look like, what your intentions are in delivering this lesson, and what may be some challenges. And then make sure you're connecting in your reflection to things that we've been talking about and reading about in the course. So that connection needs to be there. And then also questions. Within that reflection piece, what is some question that you have, either relating to the lesson segment, the learning segment, the lesson, or the course content. So somehow it needs to be related. Also, please make sure that you're not providing just kind of general surface level questions. Dig deeper, something that may make you to want to investigate further and look into investigating that to find an answer. So make it a meaningful question. So that is your task for this week, your learning segment plan. And again, if you look in week 6, here is your Turnitin link, so you're able to submit it there. If you have any questions, just a reminder that you have your discussion board, your interactive notebook, which involves 2 anchored charts about Chapter 13 for your content areas of science and social studies, and then your learning segment plan. Those are your tasks for the week that are due by the end of the term. If you have any questions or need any help, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.